At times, a time changes all time. At times, a disaster is a moment of grace. One time, this young, brilliant lawyer, Alphonsus, was defending a case, an important case in the area, and he made a professional mistake. Humanly speaking, he found it hard to forgive himself. His career was devastated. And then, as the French would say, il a été touché par la grâce, he was touched by grace, which gently prompted him to see in this disaster the finger of God and His providence. He was well formed already in both state and church law, and he was able to be ordained after further formation, and he received a call within his call. In the area of the south of Italy where he was, not far from Naples, he became aware as he moved in the country areas that whereas the towns were well cared for, there were vast areas of spiritual impoverishment in the rural areas. The people needed priests and preachers, pastors of souls who would get through to them and cared really for them on every level. He became then aware of the importance of the Word, and as he gathered companions around him, forming the congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer, he became aware that the people needed a word that would speak to their heart, and not only to their head. At the time there was a certain eloquence in the pulpits, a certain preciosity, a certain eloquence and elegance which perhaps would be flattering to the preacher by giving him renown for being an erudite man, but would have zero effect on the ears of the simple. And his principle was that the simplest woman in the back of the church would every time understand each single word and syllable that came from his mouth, and therefore also of his brethren's mouths. And this was the beginning of the whole movement of popular preaching, for which his order to this day is renowned. A message that all can understand. And he would therefore encourage them to use all that would work in that realm, going back of course to the Gospel itself, where the Lord made use of what appealed to the mind through the imagination. The Lord used stories. Eventually he became aware of the moral mess of the time in the area, and his work as a moral theologian became central to his life and earned him the title of Doctor of the Church. There were different schools of morality, but he opted for one that was applicable in the actual realm of confessions all over the world. It was that of applying that which was sufficiently likely to be true to be a way of finding absolution possible. There is in theology one area where that is not allowed. It's that of sacramental theology, where special fontal sacraments, baptism and ordination notably, have to be not in the degree and category of probabilior, more or less likely to be sufficiently valid, but actually to be tutior. They have to be absolutely certain. And hence, to this day, we have, in certain cases, the practice of doing a sacrament sub conditione, under condition. It was my own case with baptism. At Ampleforth, baptism was conferred sub conditione, but it can also happen sometimes actually in the secret domain if one isn't careful with regard to ordination. Things can go wrong sometimes in these fontal sacraments, but it's also what the great John Newman underlined when he was unravelling the whole question of Anglican orders. In this realm, one can't be just probabilior, it has to be tutior, 101%. And so it is that even though courtesy might invite towards a great respect for all the good that comes out of other church bodies, like the Anglican Communion, one in theology is nevertheless sure that one can't receive the sacraments from those who are not certainly ordained. And therefore one has to be clear. And that is why when even an Anglican bishop becomes a Roman Catholic, he has to be confirmed, because all that he has was baptism. This then is our theology, and when it comes to moral theology, we need to be clear also that certain things are not negotiable. In practice, in the realm of confession, the priest is acting in the role of a judge, on behalf, historically, of the bishop, who was the main confessor in the early church. Well, in that realm, it has to be clear that a penitent is sorry. And when one says, I'm sorry, one has the mental attitude of, and I will not do it again. Therefore, moral theology has to be clear enough to be able to give a message. This is sinful. And the Church is a good mother and washes completely in the blood of Christ. But only when the other bit is there. Otherwise, what's happening? Well, as one says in English, one is keeping one's cake and eating it. One wants the sin and one wants permission to commit it again. Rather like the person who comes to confession having robbed the bank. I have just robbed £500 and I fully intend to get the last bit, the next 500, tomorrow, but can I have absolution in the meantime? Our God is not a slot machine. And if we get into that attitude, we're only damaging our own soul. What the Old Testament refers to as hardening of the heart, the uncircumcised heart. The heart no longer feels sin. And if one is in that realm, using time after time the sacraments as an indirect permission to sin, then the heart is no longer under the domain of the Holy Spirit, but is actually having a whole spiritual ride which is in pure illusion. If God is not in charge of the spiritual life, if He is not the master, then we are doing our own thing. We can call it spirituality if we want to, but the truth is that we're being played with by the demon. fide, sapientiam prestant parvulis, Celinae gloriam Dei, et opera manum eius annunciat firmamentum, gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Lex Domini, irrepressibilis convertens animas, testimonium Dei fidei, sapientiam prestans parvum.